We really were riding the compliance wave because there was a lot of uncertainty. Government said there is going to be law. You will need to comply. So it's something you can't bet on. I've been very lucky in my life being on this wave. It's absolutely crazy if you hit it. There was this tool called Balsamiq. It was literally just a fine liner drawing style. And I was always like, but there's no style. This is so confusing. And then I think somewhere on their page they wrote it. The design is secondary, but the more you attach to this design, when you make this super brilliant, pixel perfect mockup, the less likely you are able to discard this idea. I early on learned from GitLab because they published always their internal docs and how they operate. And they always said one of the major North Stars they went for is dog fooding their own software. And I also believe in that. So if we use our software the most, if we are the power users ourselves, that gives us a huge edge.
Do you have like an idea of how much time one designer saved your engineering team?
Millions over millions for sure. Like the investments would have been huge. Usually feature development for us was half or $750,000 for sure. Alone the opportunity cost. I mean, you devote the time and the inverse, not just that you save time that they didn't do it, but also if they did it, what else could you have done? That's also something you lost.
Hello and welcome to the Design-Led podcast, where we bring on founders and product people to talk about how they design, build and launch their products. My name is Nick. I'm the founder of Grauberg, a design studio that helps startups to do exactly that, build apps, websites and software. And today with me is Peter Merkert. He was the CTO and co-founder of Retraced that raised a 50 million Series A led by Partech. It's a supply chain platform for brands like Marc O'Polo and Calzedonia. And Peter built the entire technical infrastructure from scratch, and now he's launching his own AI startup in the travel space. Welcome, Peter.
Thank you so much for being here, Nick. It's a pleasure, really, to talk about the experience and share some of the insights I have.
Awesome. I'm so happy to have you here. We already had a bit of a chat before recording, and I think it's going to be, a few amazing stories. So happy to have you here. To go right into it, the main question of this podcast, and that's what I want to ask everyone is like, how did you, specifically for Retraced, how did you start building the first few features? How did you design them? And also, how did you show those first features, the first MVP to your first customers? And maybe before you answer that, can you quickly explain what Retraced was doing?
Correct. Happy to share the story of Retraced. So Retraced, I co-founded this 2018, and that was in Germany. And we are a supply chain transparency platform. Idea was to really trace every garment from farm to its finished form, the garment itself. So really to figure out where does the cotton originate from for that piece of clothing. And it started out with a sustainability idea from my co-founders who had their own footwear brand. And then it quickly pivoted into this is a digital product we can actually scale and sell across the entire globe. And nowadays the compliance requirements are very high. There was also a sustainability wave where a lot of people were demanding more clarity, sustainable cotton. I want to know where it's coming from. So this is about Retrace. In the fashion and textile industry, one of the biggest networks I believe we have. So 25,000 companies in there. So the bigger the network, the more strong obviously the platform, because if every company is there, they can trace together where everything comes from. So from the very beginning, we had this idea, we need to connect everyone together. My co-founders had this experience as well, that they knew I need to work with my supply chain partners. Why I mention that and emphasize it so much is because it was very important for the product to be very intuitive, to be usable across the globe. So we will come back across the podcast on a variety of occasions I had where we had to consider a cultural backgrounds, readability on the person who is interacting with the product. And so how did we start? We started out by scratching really the idea, how does a supply chain look like? The supply chain of my co-founders. and then kind of translating it into a yet visual technical thing. We started out in the very beginning with Adobe XD. That was 2018, the thing, where we really dragged and dropped the items around. I did a lot. Later, one of my co-founders helped me out. He became an CPO as well, and we synergized that together. But when we started, we made small XDs and just had quick sparings. We sat together long hours in the beginning to really say, hey, is this what you imagine? So they were my first point of contact when it came to sparring. Does this work like that? And then a brief sidetrack, I had to build the foundational architecture underneath. And then we just made the first really bare screens. I mean, how web design was led in 2018, you had some kind of bootstrap elements there. So we just sourced in a lot of elements which were free available on the internet. And the most complicated piece we shaped was a supply chain editor when it comes to the user interface for the one operating in our solution. But the other piece which we can talk about is actually the user facing information. It's if you're a consumer and you scan, you want to have an experience. So we had very early on the idea we will be able to build an own application. And that's where we actually put a lot of focus. It's not the back office, but it's so the B2B back office, but let's say B2B2C. So the consumer who is actually having the garment to have an experience and seeing the product story. And back then there was the possibility to also quickly draft this out in XD. And now the user-facing side we did not expose and test with potential users. I mean, just family and friends. Like, hey, how do you think about that? Basically, very broad. It was mostly the B2B side, so the supply chain editor. And actually, how we got the traction of our first clients is my two co-founders. They went to a fair and they demoed the product. So the visual interface in the end. And I'm like, hey, you can scan a QR code. Everything was hard coded, okay? Like the experience of that was absolutely crazy because we went from January and I think end of February, we had a contact in Oracle, like the big tech company. We worked very close with them. They helped us to get on a fair that was back then Frankfurt Blockchain Summit, I think was the name. And they said, hey, you should be there because we had blockchain. And I was like, okay, well, we have to hack down an app, but we didn't have time to make any backend, anything really. But in order to get it in the App Store to make it look real, and that's how I always felt, I was like, I don't want to fake something. It should be there available. We had to expedite to submit through App Store and whatnot. But then we went to this fair. That was a technical fair. Briefly afterwards, they had an own fair, which was for fashion brands. So the technical fair didn't attract a lot of people. Everyone liked the idea though, but it wasn't proper interviews. And then they went to a fashion fair showing their shoes. So they had a footwear brand. They were traditional leather woven huaraches, very nice. They produced them in Mexico. They knew exactly the artisan who were weaving those shoes, and they wanted to tell the story to consumers. That's where it started. Now they showed this on a fashion fair. Back then, now we have to rewind us 2018. This is a more isolated space of sustainability brands, like more eco warrior style. And so they knew each other a lot. It was a small fair area, and all the other fashion owners were like, I want to have this. This is amazing. And back then, there were not a lot of software suppliers in the space as well. So it was like, more an outsider. And they just loved it from the user experience. This idea, I can position myself, I can tell a story about a product. I'm not just selling a commodity. You're wearing a hoodie. No, it's like that hoodie was sourced, for example, from organic cotton farms in Greece, then shipped over to Turkey, that was woven together, and then it came to the warehouse somewhere in Germany and then sold in a retail store. And this is how brands got attracted. Now, obviously, brands were our potential clients, and they were first really appealed to this user experience. And they were like, yeah, we want to have it. And we did separate demo calls with them, what they actually would need to do, how the technology works. Say we have a chip, a small PowerPoint presentation, digital call. Back then it was fine. Or visiting them was also a possibility, showing everything on a laptop. Saying, hey, back then it was like an NFC chip. We had the idea, or a QR code possibility. You can embed that in, and then what would you need to do? You need to cooperate with your manufacturer, and you need to put all this information into the Retraced back office. And that was just briefly shown. That was also very misleading for a lot of brands. They became our clients, and we had a bit of a choking churn because they were like, we have to do it. So they didn't really understand that they really have to map all the supply chain partners in the back office. It's a supply chain editor. You can imagine what's a comparative to we all have seen. Well, it's kind of a tree structure. It goes from left to right, and you have your brand there. Then wherever you are producing in, that's called cut, make, trim. And that cut, make, trim facility, so that's the one which has then the fabric rolls, for example, is cutting the thing and weaving everything together, so the stitches effectively and labels and things. And they are sourcing obviously from a variety of partners, so they had to map this in the interface. It wasn't complicated, but they were just postponing the use till they actually had to do it, which was usually too late. And they were like, people help us in Retrace. So I have to be honest, the first starts was a lot of quick starts we had to do ourselves. Yeah, do it yourself. You're like, yeah, it wasn't AI. It was us manual Turk going in there, asking them for documents and rebuilding the supply chains. But after a while, that helped us a lot to understand the product and the usability. So yeah, it went from there that more and more users were taking it over because you can't just map suddenly 100 supply chains because someone wants to print them now out. That was the beginning. So they were very early on exposed to the actual platform itself. So we didn't really put them onto mockups. But then when we added features, that was when we did the clickable mockups and say, hey, if you want to attach certificates, where would they do it? If you want to change the companies, what would be your experience in a supply chain editor? Because once you have the first client, you can't just inverse the entire platform anymore. Yeah, that the first person on it means you kind of are in a more locked period. So that's when we started with mockups and reaching out to clients. And the first ones were though, I also believe in my new company, it's going to be like that. They are the ones who are pouring the heart out for you. They really believe in what you bring them up as a story where you want to go to, not what the current product is. And they sticked around even to the very end. We had the very early customers, and they were always there for us to just be a sparring partner on the features. So taking time, yeah, and giving feedback there. Also a timely one because you want to iterate very fast. Yeah, so you need availability of them. And you had direct access to the co-founder of the fashion brand. Yeah, and this is how we started through, quickly getting feedback on the first mockups then when we added features.
Okay, wow, there was a lot of good stuff in it. I actually took some notes to make sure I can go deeper into some of the stuff. One thing I'm really curious about, because I experienced it as well when I launched my startup, and I heard that from other startups as well, is that pushback that you mentioned. Like, hey, wow, we have to do it ourselves. Is that, we didn't know that. How did you handle that, and how did you turn that maybe problem more into a feature later?
So, I mean, honestly, I think we were just bleeding a lot of times through it, and we were like, well, we have to take the hit. It's like you have a recurring revenue, and you're like, well, you have someone who is willing to pay for that. So somehow it provides value. So you have this belief as well. You just did yet something wrong that they don't use it themselves. So yes, you're not at that scaling phase, but we just took the hit. So a lot of times we were actually just saying, hey, okay, we help you out. We put resources down, and then even the first developers, designer, we all sat down and mapped supply chains. And I have to be honest, this even happened later stages. So 6, 7 years in, that still happened. If a client has a request and says suddenly, oh, something happened, maybe production changes, I need your support, then we would help them. But of course, the great thing about it is something I early on learned from GitLab as well, nearly unknown to the world. But so the GitHub equivalent, because they published always their internal docs and how they operate. And they always said one of the major North Stars they went for is dog fooding their own software. And I also believe in that. So if we use our software the most, if we are the power users ourselves, that gives us a huge edge. Of course, it shouldn't stay like that, but it gives you a lot of insights, how the tool is operating, where are the bugs, because you can also share this internally to someone doing a demo and say like, well, that button, it's not doing what it's supposed to do for now. So that helped a lot. But obviously what we did is we tried to ask them what would they need in order to do it themselves. It's always this open question, which is, I think, the one I get always, like, as founder, that's the inverse perspective. It's not like a yes, no answer you want to have. You want to have this, what would you need now in order to do it yourself? What's still missing for you? And that's never ending. It's always the same question. It doesn't matter how big the software is. And that's what we ask. And we always got the feedback. And they said, well, you click around and it's not flexible. I have the same supply chain, basically the same supply chain, but it's, similar-ish. But at some point, the supply chain usually diverges. I give you for that a little bit about background now in fashion and textile. So if you have let's say sneakers, and the one is red, the other one is black. Even if you think the supply chain is the same, it cannot be absolutely the same because there's red color and there's black coloring. So at some point, it diverges, but that is really deep in the supply chain. And very early on, our clients complained and said, this is too complicated for us because we don't want to have 20 times the same supply chain and then change something in the end. We need a way to, kind of let's it's how I always think. I sometimes think perfectionist. You need 20 different supply chains. They're like, I want to have one, and then I just put 5 companies in there. And I'm like, yeah, but this doesn't work because it's not one supply chain with ordering black and red, but they're like, it's good enough. And that feedback is something one has to be very ask the right question to get it and be able to receive it. And I think that's what we did that's why we scaled so much and got this big funding now in the end, and have so far a successful race in the startup world as Retraced.
You said something interesting, and I think that's now with AI even more enabled. Is that I had the feeling like 5 to 10 years ago, everyone wanted to be just software, no service, no manual work at all. But nowadays, adding a bit of service to any software product is super smart. And I think more and more startups should do that. What do you think about that?
I like the perspective, Nick. I have to be honest, I would rather use my co-founder Lucas in Retraced. He was always saying, hey, we are 50% software, 50% it's customer service. We had from the very beginning, very early on, we had this customer success idea. So what I mentioned to you, well, if a client didn't get to map out supply chains or do something in our software, we went ahead and did it. I would already call it like that. It's just that we didn't charge for it and didn't title it. But I agree that it can be useful. I think, though, generally that it's best if it's very complementary to the software and it is not too deeply integrated. Because even in the very ends, we had often issues where we had then to operate in it. And I think that's an indicating, harshly spoken, since I was a co-founder, a failure of the software because it should be working that the user can just handle it themselves. It should be smooth enough for whatever the user want to operate it with. But of course, if they're at some point willing to pay for services for someone to operate it, of course, why shouldn't we offer it? So there are the two separations I always say. So the one is a complementary, where I say that makes tons of sense. It's education. We did workshops with clients on their site and so on. So that was fantastic. And the other one is the support within the platform, like doing something for the client really on your software. So in their account, it's just kind of anyone could do it. So I would be careful putting too much in there, but because at some point it's a tricky balance as a company as well, because I mean, in the VC world, no one will pay you if you're operating instead of your own tool. And contrarily, they will give you zero valuation because they say, well, there's zero traction out there. It's just fake because you're actually a service providing company. You're not software company, but VCs invest in software companies. So it's a very difficult fine line, and we always try to be more minimal. So in the very end, we distinguished between customer success, which was outside, and customer service, which was inside. Now I don't know how it's nowadays, but that's what we did when I was there to distinguish these two fields, because customer service is the one operating with intercom, inspecting the account in case there's help, asking for access, stuff like that, and fixing supply chain stuff and meta, or someone deleted something by accident and it wasn't the user of course, and the customer success is like long-term planning with an Excel sheet, roadmap. What kind of influence do you have in your organization? How can I support you there? How can you expand the usage of Retraced as other users are on it? So that's my answer to service. Smart, but one needs to keep the good balance there.
Okay. When you say it like that, it absolutely makes sense. There's one more thing I noted down from before. You said something like when they had to use it or had to do the supply chain, they started doing it more. What role did compliance make in the growth of Retraced?
Very good question, actually, indeed, because when we started out, it was more nice to have, and how do you go, a unique selling proposition of fashion brands to position themselves. So it was a positioning capability to use Retrace and say, I can tell you, it's not just a product. I sell you that specific supply chain for it and like the story with it. But then compliance came up. There was beforehand already an event which actually shaped us and baked the value in Retraced, and that was Rana Plaza. That was 2011-12 in Bangladesh, where a building collapsed with workers inside. It was absolutely horrible, and it popped up in media because every fashion brand, or a lot of fashion brands, it was very difficult to find who was actually producing in this building. Kind of everyone said, oh, it wasn't me. But then it turns out these buildings are owned by companies which are producing for a lot of these fashion brands. And most of them didn't even know that they produced through that. So probably investigations figured that out. And that actually, that's something which really brought us together as co-founders as well, that we always had this aspiration of doing something good in the world. Now this is how we started. You asked for compliance. That's like, it slowly started from there, 2019-20, it got stronger, and we really were riding the compliance wave because there was a lot of uncertainty. Government said there is going to be law. You will need to comply. There were also acts released, indeed, which a lot of fashion brands were not prepared, and a lot of software wasn't there. So it's something you can't bet on. Talked with a lot of people. I've been very lucky in my life being on this wave. It's absolutely crazy if you hit it. I believe it's like surfers in Hawaii on a massive wave. You just got it. It's lucky. You can increase the chances by even, getting out of employment and founding a company, because without it, it won't happen. But there's just so much you can do to push the luck. But we were riding it, and we really got the backwind about a different variety of legislations, and this is why we were also scaling up absolutely crazy. Just after COVID, when the doors opened again, the scaling was crazy for compliance. We used that time then during COVID to really rebuild everything. So from the first years, we've learned what people didn't operate with, and then compliance came through with a variety of acts.
That for everyone from the US who is listening in Europe, compliance is a big thing. So that's why I really wanted to go into how you can use compliance in order to actually ride it as a wave. I love that analogy. It's really cool.
Yeah, there was someone because we also were having Alstein from Carsten Maschmeyer. That's I think one of the billionaires, and he's running in Höhle der Löwen, which is the Lion's Den or the Shark Tank equivalent in Germany. And he was invested with this for Alstein, and they were having Maschmeyer days, and there was someone talking. I unfortunately don't remember the name, but he was talking about riding the wave. So how unicorns get there, because that's how I think most of the time you become a unicorn. again, there must be an increase in luck somehow. You can't just completely lobby and influence this to full extent, but riding the wave is fantastic. Always searching as an entrepreneur, where is that coming up, this mega trend in 1, 2 years where no one is looking at? Yeah.
Amazing. Okay, so this was my the most interesting parts of what I wanted to know. Now I would love to go a bit more back. I will take a step back and want to learn a bit more about you and the story. If you like, for someone who doesn't know Peter Merkert, what should they know about you?
What should they know about me? I always like to take myself out of the equation. My background is I studied computer science. I love engineering and technology. I did from my childhood onwards. I had a gap year in China, which really opened my eyes between bachelor and master. That was when I was exposed in electronic design and manufacturing. So I was going to China, and this is now back then 2013. So we still had a different worldview how it's positioned nowadays. Like people were more reserved that I went there. Not like, oh my God, you go to China, this is fantastic. And what I learned there is working with all the different departments together. So I have an insight into they had sales, customer success, obviously there. They had the accounting department, they had the procurement department, quality assurance, engineering, warehousing. And I also talked to a lot of people, had to educate them on software, and I learned the big gap. I think that's what shapes me and what's interesting about my personality, that I understand the technology pretty good, I would say. And I've talked to a lot of people from a variety of areas, and my dream was always to bridge technology and bring it very close to them, make it accessible, make it understood, make it so that they understand themselves how they can make the best use of it. And that carries through my whole life. That was then with blockchain actually to make it accessible through, well, in the beginning, Retraced, but I'm also pragmatic and saying, well, it doesn't make sense anymore. It wasn't providing business value, so I'm able to drop things then and say it's not made yet for the world. It doesn't provide us any value. It provides us potentially even pain. And so that's what I also pursued and retraced the whole time. I tried to share my learnings on stage. Was at the Oracle AI World, so the headline conference was there on a keynote as well. Love to talk about my topics and love to take startups, I think, from 0 to 1. That's what I love.
And during your journey at, like, even before Retrace and now after, what would you say is the biggest learning you made when it comes to building startups, building companies?
I think most important is having the founder fit 100. So there's always a talk about product market fit. There's a lot of business technology out there, which by 2 other co-founders, they went to business schools. They taught me a lot. Very grateful for that. And I think with them together and myself, I've learned so much over the years to identify most important is the product, the founder product fit, so that I'm really 100% in behind the product. And whatever I do, I can best embody it myself. I think there's nothing more important than it's too little talked about. Because that brings over this passion, this relentless, forever lasting passion on something which is like I'm just obsessed with. Maybe the world isn't, but it's my strong belief that I will provide value in the world. And that's what I hope everyone can at some point find for themselves in whichever scope they work, even in their employment.
So, can you describe the founder product fit a bit more? Like, how can you spot if there is no fit, or the other way around? How would you spot that?
So given with Retraced and the journey I've been through, it is easier over time with experience to identify if someone is truly, if there's a fit between an own value and whichever job I'm now executing. It might be fun, it might be employment. If the values of that are like very strongly overlapping. In a Venn diagram, you have a like they're overlapping. And as soon as it starts to drift, um, I mean, in let's say just in employment, the rates are higher to drift because the company is just telling me the values it has, and hopefully I have a high overlap. And this is why we do an interview also for me to figure out, do I fit to that organization? And founder product fit is for me this absolute perfect overlap on. I so deeply believe in that. I carry that forward, even if someone is telling me no. I think it's the easiest way also to survive these no's, sayers. It's the easiest way to survive any kind of resistance I'm facing. It's being confident about something. Others would say, how can he be confident about that? So that's where I think that's founder product fit.
So it seems easy when everyone is saying no, but they just keep going because they believe in the product, they know about the product, and otherwise you probably cannot stand all the no sayings anyways.
Yeah, exactly. At some point, you will churn out internally. It's you will get depressed. There's a lot of ups and downs in entrepreneurship. So that happens. The dips just get stronger. I always say the amplitude got higher in both directions. Euphoria as well as depression. The more money was involved, also the stronger it became, and the frequency was just increased over the years. And that must be existent because that's the one which is lifting one out. People listen to podcasts or motivational stuff on YouTube. That's one way. I do believe that the longest lasting way is a founder product fit, so that I truly believe in this journey and I just go through with it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. This, like all these ups and downs, and you also mentioned before, eventually you started scaling quite fast. How was that? Because CTO is a good title, but if you're CTO of a one-person startup, that doesn't mean much. But scaling to like a bigger, also technical team, how did you get there? Like also personally, like how did you grow personally as well?
I would say, unfortunately, I grew personally, I guess, a little bit too late from what is necessary. As
Mm-hmm.
typically in companies, and no one should be depressed about this. I'm sharing my personal observation here for myself in this. It's the company is growing faster than an individual can. When the point of
Mm-hmm.
time hits where you have suddenly a lot of revenue and you need to scale the team, I was not, no way ready to be a leader of now a team of bigger than like 3 people, where you could still call it family because you can make a stand up, you can check up on everyone, no problem. You don't really need performance reviews because you have the high frequency interaction. The point where it started to really be like, this is tricky, is when we crossed through 2 teams. So I would say from 8 it got tricky. After 11, 11 was my spot where I was like, all right, well here that doesn't work. And that's when I also started for myself to introduce the middle management. So I got an engineering manager established. Um, and from my own experience, this journey is just too fast. I was not able to yet reflect enough what it means, what I have to do, what are the people expecting of me as a leader. I was doing way too little performance reviews, and you just don't have time because the VC world, this first time founder, they don't tell you that. It's like, well, you need to revenue, sales pipeline up. That's what we focused on. And I would say I've realized in the end uh, what I should have been doing, or I tried then to do in the last 1 year, to really focus more on the leadership, so that the CTO role, I mean, I agree with you. It's like you make a one-man show, it doesn't really matter at all. And even if you're like 10, it doesn't really matter. But that's when it breaks through and it shows, are people quickly able to adapt and learn and think, okay, I'm not deciding here on specific things. I need to focus on performance reviews. I need to think the whole time, what kind of goals do I have to set up together with my employees or them themselves? And I'm there as a sparring partner, especially as just as a coach. And they set it up. And so they grow themselves also in the speed of the organization. they can obviously only grow as fast as I grow. And there's always a cascading effect of speed, of growth of an organization. Yeah, and I recommend, if I have a recommendation for someone listening, it would be getting a coach early on as if I was already 2 years in advance. So while I think I am now starting to scale a team, how is someone who's now 2 years in advance, how did he or she did it 2 years back? I had some people reaching out to me doing that. So this kind of future looking, listen to the elderly. That's what they always told us. Then I understood because they have been through it. And then contacting these individuals on LinkedIn and just asking, hey, I'm currently at this stage, half an hour, no sales call. I just would love to know what am I supposed to look out for when I now suddenly hire my first manager. I didn't do this. I recommend everyone to do that. Well, now I look at the things differently. So when I also scale or when I will need to hire, maybe eventually at some point, I would also first draft out very clearly the requirements so that when someone joins, we've also not taken the probation period as part of the onboarding process, as of the evaluation period. So it was always the assumption if I go through all these interviews, finally I got an agreement with someone. But that's actually from that moment onwards, when we are talking about someone being in the organization, that's also part of that. And so really to be close to it. And even Carsten Marschmeyer always said, I need to look back like a month in and say, have I done everything possible to make it the best possible onboarding for that employee also to shine and to be a shining star and rise to the occasions and understand really what's happening in the organization. And often there's too little time spent on that. That means even in this remote first world, meeting with them on site, wherever that is, doesn't matter, like together, really spending the 3 days together, not just doing my emails in the site, no, but really coaching them already. I think that's what I would definitely do the next time I would hire. Devote their way more time, making very clear the stencil of what is expected. That makes it easier for every newcomer to also know what are you looking out for. Because ultimately, if I join an organization, I also want to I just ask the question, what do you need from me when I have work to do? And so that I'm ready and I say, well, this is exactly the path. This is where we want to go. And this is where I see it. And then flipping the question, what do you now think as a newcomer? What can you do as a first steps so that they get the autonomy very early? Because that's the key. Getting autonomy, encouraging everyone. Culture, super important. Setting way more focus on that.
Do you have, like, as a CTO, you hired obviously some technical people. How can you spot like that A player in a technical person? Because I get the feeling they're a bit more reserved and harder to spot than I would say like a generally entrepreneurial salesperson. They know how to sell themselves, but as a technical person might be a bit more difficult. How can you spot that?
So first is I started early on to look at values. So does someone actually think, breathe the same? And that is quickly evaluated. I'm no expert in that. We got experts in coaches and also early on for that cultural evaluation. I think that is one of the most crucial steps because that already leads just people who are matching. So it's very easy to talk to. I would always declare this. You go in a room, there are 10 people, or I go in a room, there are 10 people, and there's like two I can super easy talk to about my life instantly. I would declare this as a high value match. And it doesn't mean the other eight are bad. It's just that the value match isn't there. We think differently, we have different opinions. So it's easier to connect to all of the 10. Now, the organization has values and has a culture and behaviors, and just checking on some occasions, how did that person behave there and how would they behave? So these questions, which I found myself always like, why would you like, what is it about? But actually the answer differs very, very highly and there is no right or wrong answer. The question is, does that match and overlap with the behavior the organization is actually wanting you to have? So that's the first thing we did. And from then onwards, we had a technical assessment, a take-home test. Back then there was no AI, so I didn't really give them a lot of guardrails. And then I expected after they have done this that they do it in due time. So usually what I did is I said, hey, you can take it, you can do it whenever you want. Here's a booking link for your next appointment. And if they haven't booked within a week, well then churn, even if they would submit it afterwards. Because again, it's a behavior I expect, so that they would tell me, hey, Peter, I can't do it this week. Behavioral check. And then in the technical interview, they should present their code. And code presentation showed everything. I gave them always 20 minutes to explain themselves. I had always a second person with me, explain how your thought process was. And I think that gives everyone a breathing room. Usually people can then talk already. They can present, so they get over their thoughts. They can reason what they have been thinking about. And it was super crucial, because even someone gave you something shiny, especially in the age of AI now for code, but also design. When we did this product design, so I was there, looking shiny, you thought, oh my God, top notch. We don't have to have an interview. Let's start on Monday. If the presentation skill isn't there, if the idea cannot be convened, if the reason cannot be stated, then it's difficult. It was probably behaviors we looked out, and that understanding. So this is how we evaluated it. And I would add something now, again, as something I had as a lesson myself, too late, evaluating on site. I understand now that evaluating once on site, even taking the plane, collapsing it together, I know it's horrendous from the effort, but in the end of the day, to meet the individual once before moving forward isn't super important. Very late in the stage and remote first, because you have such a big funnel of applicants. But doing that, we did this with everyone non-technical. And with technical people, because we hired in the beginning all around the world, it was impossible. It was not something I thought about, but I would recommend everyone to do, because in person shows the awkwardly. it's still possible in a camera to hide that. But if we meet in person, let's see, Nick. Are we still drinking coffee? Fine. Can we just talk about the life? I assume so, because we had nice chats before, but especially in interviews, it's tricky, because there's a staged talk, very staged one. So you don't know how people talk about their life, how much they are willing to share. And it's not needing to do everything, but you will figure out a lot. We identified a lot of behaviors, at least then there. And we did this for everyone, sales, customer success. We did them on site.
Okay. I love the in-person touch, because I also had about 20 interviews in person, and I love to take them out for coffee, because there you can see how they treat waiters. I've every time in my life when I saw someone mistreating a waiter, I knew I was spot on that this is not a good fit, and I will
See?
continue doing so.
And I believe it's because your value and that behavior of, like, you should treat waiters well is something you pursue, and it relates to a value you have rooted. And that is only, it's so blurry. Just a yes or no question can't answer that. It's a question, how do they behave? And that you figure out there, yes.
Cool. Okay, so I wanna, just because I thought about it while you answered, I wanna go a bit more back into like the user experience and how you think about user experience and how your team thought about user experience. Uh, do you think it was the role? I don't want to say design, because people usually assume it's just visual stuff, but I want to say specifically user experience. Do you think it played a big role in developing and continue in developing your software?
Yeah, absolutely. I think actually, I can back up the start of Retrace. We set up a design where we did something. I just bootstrapped something, bootstrap template out of the box, done. And then I think a year, so we decided that we make a design. So we get someone. I don't know if that was a consultation. I think we got maybe a consultant in, but that's also when we already had hired someone for UI UX, which is not great to blur it, but aside that, we got someone dedicated for this position now, saying, hey, you are the one who thinks for the design, for us. and that person orchestrated it. Fantastic employee, was very dedicated, and she was helping us to make actually a cohesive style. That was important already because a year in, I want to also mention it, it's still fine to just look ugly. It doesn't matter. It's, I mean, this idea, yeah, of course, nowadays you can do with AI so much out of the box, Google Pomeli and you name it, so it looks fantastic instantly, but it can very quickly distract from the actual value I'm providing. I'm not providing a value by a nice design, but actually what is the core value? We get lost in the design, which should support to convey that. Now, we did the design rework, we implemented that, got it into our platform and had a cohesive style. And from there onwards, I mentioned as well in the beginning, we more just did the features ourselves, and then we were the ones dog fooding the software ourselves. So that's at the tipping point when we said, okay, we need feature development with external clients, so we need also cohesive designs we can give them. So we had the standards. We made Adobe XD back then. Later then in the years, it became Figma, that we can actually give them clickable mockups. That was gold, absolute gold. And the idea why is because, especially we had already several engineers. If I would have handed it out to be developed, it would back then very expensive because you had to really devote resources. And even now with AI, you may introduce a bigger code bike, more hallucination. It doesn't matter what you do. It's tricky to just keep it very, very shallow on clickable mockup. And I've learned something. I mean, I even violate this nowadays myself when I reflect on it. But there was this tool called Balsamiq. Balsamiq, written with a Q, was literally just a fine liner drawing style. And I was always like, but there's no style. This is so confusing. And then I think someone on their page, they wrote it or so, that the idea being of user experience is you need to, the design is secondary, but the more you attach to this design, when you make this super brilliant, pixel perfect mockup, the less likely you are able to discard this idea. And I was like, oh, so true. The more I devoted, even as an organization, and potentially even putting engineers there, the less likely I'm willing to discard it. And actually now, even talking here, I find myself again in this rabbit hole because it's so easy with AI to over-engineer, over-design, you name it, to make too much and then posing it to an individual. So that's what I do now very early on, give them something to click around. And then I'm like, but why don't they see the functionality? Why don't they see it? And Balsamiq made it nice. I mentioned the name because it was so rudimentary. It had, I think, no, not even colors. It was black and white. It was so clickable, but it took all this stuff out of the equation where I could potentially commit to a design and not discard it. So that clients actually click through it and give you honest feedback about, hey, yeah, that kind of flow works. Because you're evaluating the user experience, not the design system. And it's just tricky to find the right balance because now with the tool I'm building now, it's a mapping and travel planning. It must yet convey sufficiently the idea, obviously, what you're going to do. Otherwise, the interview makes no sense. But Balsamiq was always a great idea to give someone the impression what is going to happen and just have dozens of them aligned and say, you're doing this action now. So if you were in an interview, the designer was usually leading it. We were sitting in there just to listen. And it's like, okay, if you do this action, here's another screenshot that's happened now so that the user explains on what are they seeing, what's the experience. So that's how we developed then. We did just a couple of times Balsamiq. Often we spent too much time on Adobe XD, but user experience, back to your question, was always hung up very, very high because we knew the costs of development are extremely high. With AI, yes, they got lower, but they're still needing you to go usually through the entire organizational flow. And it's not just giving like a product designer the flexibility or user experience designer then the flexibility to quickly try something out.
Do you have like an idea of how much time one designer saved your engineering team? Because, as you said, building mockups or building prototypes by the tech team costs time. Building the wrong features costs a lot of time. Like, how, how much time do you think it saved you actually?
This opportunity cost calculation is obviously super difficult to do, but millions over millions for sure. Because so to expand a little bit on the flow, so first we had this designer. I just tame it like this. She had both hats on. She did the evaluation with users. From there, we had several iterations together as a team to identify, okay, what did the user actually think about it? Where does it not work? What job to be done is not yet satisfied? What doesn't work? What else would the user expect in order to make it work? And based on this, iterate on that design completely like offline, not engineered yet by any code. And only once we had in the very end the metric to say we need to expose it to 10 users and 8 need to approve it, need to say yes, the job gets done. That's a high bar because that requires already 10 interviews at least. And the job to be done was so big, like the investments would have been huge. Usually feature development for us was half or three quarters of a million for sure. Alone the opportunity cost. I mean, you devote the time and the inverse, not just that you save time that they didn't do it, but also if they did it, what else could you have done? That's also something you've lost if you didn't avoid it. And at the moment, it was then actually handed over to the technology team. It could easier be breakdown. So there was still discrepancies. It's not nothing is perfect in the world. I've also realized it's like suddenly, oh well, we can't do it exactly the way we envisioned. We would be able to pull this off on a supply chain editor. It's like you have this nice visual supply chain 20 node style, and then someone comes and says like we have 500 farms in there. You're like, all right, we need different clustering and so on. But generally speaking, I saved millions over millions over millions for sure. And it's absolutely necessary to do before handing it down because it can confuse. So going on to end the part, it was handed over to engineering, and because the design was approved by users, we said, okay, we can go ahead and implement it like that. And there was also little questions anymore about, oh, I think the button should be somewhere else. It's like the user said so. So that got completely out of the equation. If you have enough clients you can do this with, amazing. If we thought as co-founders we are smarter than the world and we pressure this thing through and we don't need 8 out of 10, usually it backfired. I mean, really, usually it backfired. Uh, I busted so many bugs for sure because it's this idea, just let's push it through, let's implement it down. I'm pretty sure this is going to be useful for users. There's a lot of things going wrong. You don't get the buy-in of the team. There is no storytelling, like because it's like, well, Peter said so. Peter has this idea, and it's not a client had the idea. So it feels like I'm the buying persona then for everyone in the team. So I need to be the one who is approving, but I'm like, well, I'm not the one who's using it anymore. I'm going on conferences. So it usually backfired and led to a lot of confusion. A confusion why? Because if the design isn't cohesive, if the user experience hasn't been thought of from the beginning, what ends up happening is if you go to engineers and you suddenly change the flow, I mean, either it's a massive refactoring, usually anyways, but second of all, they understand you less what was supposed to be happening. So very often it's like, wait a second, but then we have these edge cases. We did this with internal tooling. We had a back office for our customer service team, so the one helping inside of the platform. Documents which got uploaded, proof documents for supply chains that this is organic cotton. They were actually checked by us as Retraced as a service. So we had this back office, and that was a sophisticated state management about going forth and back with the user about that a document is accepted or not, because they built up the visual supply chain, very sophisticated, has like very much branching, and they upload a document there. But in the back office, we may reject it. So then you have to interact with the user, this ping pong. And that was a tool we did actually not go through the whole flow because design is also then otherwise a bottleneck for everything else. And that usually led to a lot of confusion about state management. So we had a lot of problems there. So we had a lot of mismatches about states. Yeah, no state diagram because it got blurry, because everyone changed here and there. Suddenly customer service says, can we not just automate this? And if that is this state, then please just move it. And the engineers, yeah, of course I do this. But then suddenly you have state mismatches and you have more problems. There's always a balance. You asked me about it, Nick. How high did we value UX? I think very high. Sometimes you can't do it. You shouldn't do it. You shouldn't skip it. Sometimes you have to skip it, but be aware of the fatalities coming with it.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think the like a big learning as a designer over the last 1 or 2 years is getting closer to the engineering team, specifically for things like state management. I always was looking out for the happy path, so what a user really wants to get done and how we make them happy. But then engineering comes back with, but what if they have, as you said, 500 different locations? Or what if it's an error state? What if only this card here doesn't load? How should it look like? And this you only know when you really work closely with the engineering team.
Yeah, agreed. So in the very end, when AI also was on the rise, so the last 1.5 years now, looking back, starting beginning of last year, we also said as an envision, it's I also read in a newsletter now recently, enterprise AI executive, I think. It's like the T-shaped employee with a description of something very specific, let's say a product designer or a user experience designer, or even a backend engineer, that should be more this distribution, not just T-shaped on a very thin layer of an organization, but having more depth on the different understanding of other areas, because your own area can shrink a bit because AI can support you a bit, a lot. And that's also what we saw. So we have set also our designers and together with the front end engineers. So just that you have this pollination, literally like syncing this extreme programming so that they are actually in a call together and they change it together then in case they wanted to adjust something. Because especially in if you want to adjust something which is already running, you don't want to go through the whole machinery. So just sitting them both together, they learned, I think, a lot about the state management. Because yes, the product design usually goes from a happy path, and the engineer always just looks from the inverse. Always, it's always like what does not work. You always make the exclusion if something doesn't work. Yeah.
Oof. Okay, I could go a lot more into this. Some recent learnings about this as well. Um, but today is really not about me. I would love to learn a bit more about also. So all these things you mentioned, all these learnings you had, like what would you bring into your new startup venture now? Like what would you make differently now that you're building something else in the travel space?
So, what I want to do from the very beginning is, as I just mentioned, T-shaped education to have a more holistic view for everyone. Anyone who would then join in case I need their support, that I have a flow which is very accessible for everyone. So I would evaluate, to be honest, a lot of product design and everyone who was non-engineer to be also on the engineering side and vice versa. Someone who's front-end engineer that they can just go in Shadcn and customize a theme quickly and make it look like website not awkward. I think that's something I would just definitely look out for when recruiting someone, so that I expect a more broad setup and you don't have the specialties. So I'm strictly convinced that there shouldn't be someone titling themselves nowadays front end engineer. For me, it doesn't exist anymore. Just does not. Also, user experience and user design. I understand there are in detail they are differences, but again, they're compensated with AI so much that I think there should be a broad spectrum setup of knowledge nowadays. What I also do is coming from Adobe XD, a little bit of Balsamiq, as I mentioned, having now Figma, that in the very end, we started this in Retraced, and for my journey, I will take it on. Very shallow, making like clickable structure, like real clickable structures. So mockups in your browser, because AI made it such a commodity to generate code and you don't care about validity states, so taking it completely separate if you have a production system, like a mockup section, a test system, you name it, whatever you want to do, that there you can just try around and you can basically with Claude just experiment like around and just change it and have those made it a real experience that bridges a lot the problems which we have seen that you have this the really expensive features are the ones which are obviously getting approved in the beginning and have a problem in the very end, like about scalability or so, something which is like a supply chain with 500. What are you doing? Do you cluster them? How does the user actually want to have it? And you figure this out so late, they are so expensive. And so that gets very early bridge because if there's nothing nowadays, even AI can visualize it quickly with and fix that. That means we have to take it from a different angle. I cannot let a user just go through this demo. They get hyped up and they're like, oh my God, especially with AI, it's like, AI calculation button, a little bit of a spinner, and then poof. And it's like, wait a second, this will cost me 2 minutes, asynchronous job as an engineer. There's no way the user waits. And no one thought about it. That happened with us with the Copilot and so on. And I would do this from the very beginning to say, what are realistic time spans to make it close to it, but yet detached from the system, so I can just throw it away. I have a design system anyways. I just say, well, just use tokens from there, build up this clickable structure now, make a website standalone, and the user can just go in there. The great thing about it is, if that structure exists to really hack down these mockups, you can make a Claude skill out of it, or you name it, use your AI or favorite, and you can leverage the so-called local storage in the browser, which is you don't have to ship it to a backend. There's no way. Don't do this at all. But the storage in the browser is actually quite, I mean, it's good enough for definitely for demos. And actually just dump everything in there, whatever is necessary. And the great thing is on a button click, you can also clean it and just refresh it for the next demo. So that's amazing. And there's something else most of these design tools miss. If you even give clickable mockups out, they try to inject like Google Analytics and so on into those. But the thing is, if you have it on your website, well, you anyways have LogRocket, PostHoc, or whichever tool you have for those sessions as well. And if you let the user interact with that, you have the entire session recorded. And it's amazing because you can replay it, an engineer can potentially see it, you can really see what happened, you can recapture it also in your mind, what the user had problems with, and these tools also figure out where did the user click, which I didn't even hear. You can do this with the existing tool set. I don't want to say Figma and so on is not helpful. I'm saying for my setup that works so way better to have these mockups straight in the browser using the local storage, ship the URL out, and I could even do it async. Dangerous, but I can do it because I can say, hey, how about you have a look, especially on quick iterations. I did this with one person. That was very helpful because they knew the page already. So I'm like, hey, sorry, now have a look at it. How does that work for you? That was impossible before.
Yeah, I get that. Especially like with the browser, the limitations you have. I didn't know that in the beginning. I'm not an engineer. I was building something, and then the browser. I clicked the button, and when refreshing it, the button was in the previous state again, and I was like, "Oh, why didn't it save it?" But as you said, for a prototype, this is actually exactly what you want.
Exactly. So it's perfectly fine for that. And I mean, the browser has all capabilities, and you see something very interesting there. I do now travel planning, so I have a map. Map is the center of the universe, is the center of my life, but definitely for the application. How does this operate in different browsers? Because obviously I shipped the link to someone opening on a mobile. Yeah, well, my app aim is not for that. Now the thing is, how do I visualize it that the user knows, hey, sorry, bro, don't go on here. And in that view, it does not make sense. Just don't continue. Because if they try to, they may destroy their plan or like the demo, like it doesn't make sense. And also you have the different browsers as well. So that's something you get exposed very late. We had problems with that in Retraced because there are technical tools how you can ensure that your page is probably rendered similar in all the browsers. But then we had a lot of requests from Asia, from China. So, they use their own browser system, and that slightly differs. So we had a lot of connectivity issues and rendering issues, yeah, which we have known then way too late, because in our pipeline of development, we had Datadog, real user monitoring, offers the same capability, replaying and so on, but we used that way too late. So it was picked up in the last half year when I was in Retraced, that someone actually looked at the sessions. But you see a lot of rendering issues there, where it's a black box distance. You kind of don't even know what's happening. Why does the user even complain? And then you suddenly realize, oh my God, for them it's not even rendered. Ah,
Yeah, that's a that's a fair point. Um, what I'm really curious about, because that's what I recently also saw on LinkedIn, is since that writing code is so easy nowadays, what would you say is the hardest thing for you when launching your new startup now?
I follow people like Greg Eisenberg, for example, and actually, it's I do I have to be special? I don't. I've realized that. Also in Retraced, after a while, there were a lot of copycats coming up. That was quite cute, actually. So copycat is when someone actually clones your website and clones your product, basically. Obviously, you can do this with YouTube videos and whatnot. I like you take screenshots, you say rebuild me. You get there very close. In Retraced, we had obviously our mode. So our defensible thing was the community. I think that's also something a lot of creators probably like you are looking out for. So your community is your mode. And with software, it is very similar. Just because there is a competitor existence doesn't mean that I cannot also enter the market and make my fair share. And second of all, why did I mention Greg Eisenberg? I think he mentioned it as like, it's good if there is competition, because that means there is also money to grab. A bit of hedonistic attitude, but in the end of the day, it's true. If there was no software like mine, that would that would be dangerous blue ocean. It's an experiment I go for, and that I think, or maybe on the diary of a CEO, there was someone also making a lot of startup and said, just copy something which is existent and then adjust after you acquired some clients, because that company is already able to do it. And just because they're great, I know how depressing it is. We go back to the founder product fit. I need to be confident. I just love it. I just want to do it myself. I have some smart ideas, but don't do it in the beginning. Just copy what they have because it works apparently, and then adjust. So back to your question, in the age of AI and what to look out for when you make your startup, product founder fit, and then, well, be happy if there's competition out there, because that means there's a market for it, especially if there's funding and stuff like that. And a lot of clients, it's great. And the third one is then really working with the users and the community, respectively, what you have, being there close, being there near. I love the YouTube creators who are actually coming back on comments. It's what I then really value, and I support those channels. So, yeah.
That's a good point. Because so how can I say this? There's this life cycle of a product or of a product or an app where it's early, it's exciting, then they know they're getting bigger, they need to build more features that are also required, more compliance stuff, and eventually they're just another software. So even if you do copy something, it's a different stage. It's a different, yeah, you're getting early adopters for a new product, and that's a lot more exciting. And they also have a lot of money. They they like to pay. Um, so it's not just the same product. It's also a different stage, and I think that's also quite interesting, especially when it comes to apps,
You're
for
right.
instance.
You're right. I think the point you mean there is the people joining us, like clients, they also like to be early adopters. I think some people really love that. They really love to
Yeah.
be like, oh, I know Peter. Hey, I whatever, idea. I give you like a couple of bucks per month. It's like you have your first revenue quite quickly, kind of. If I wanted to ask for it now, um, because they really love to be there and see that journey, and they just love the enthusiasm. So they love this founder product fit. They just think, yeah, that's nice because yeah, if I go, I mean, travel planning, if I do something with planning, I booking and kayak, you name it, they're all my competition in theory. But the thing is, they can just move that fast. I mean, I admire Google's like Anthropic, like Google, how fast they are now. But even then, they can only move that far away. Even if what Anthropic is posting every week a page about a specific vertical they are now very useful in. It's medicine, it's law, it's teaching, you name it. It doesn't mean that all teaching is gone and all MOOCs, so massive online courses, are just vanishing just because there's Claude. It's no, they are still made for a different purpose. So yeah, I would not be discouraged by that. And well, I don't want to. I don't discourage myself for that.
I'm exactly that type of person. You know Whoop, like this health
Yeah.
tracker. I'm a big Whoop fan for over 2 years already. And now recently the Google Fitbit came out. And
Uh-huh.
it's a like from Google, similar product, almost looks the same. And there was no reason why I should want to switch, but I was like, hey, there's something new. And I'm just super curious about it. I never thought about switching from my Whoop, but now I'm like, maybe.
Yeah, 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 exactly. So this kind of some people love to jump as well, and we have also to let our clients go. Yeah, if they're early adopters, they may just switch away. We had this with some clients, and yeah, we also obviously churned. I mean, in the size we had, you have a natural churn rate there of 5%. It's all good. Um, but yeah, they just went to different solutions, which were faster iterating, coming up with AI in a different kind of positioning as well. I mean, when we talk about that field, they you kind of copycat, but let's say they were always in behind and then they position themselves to stronger with AI, smaller team, easier to pivot left, right. You can carry the whole team easier. I mean, we were like at peak time, like nearly 80 people in Retrace. That was quite a lot. I mean, in order to educate everyone on a slight change of mission or slight change of plan means at least doing two all hands in the company if you're globally distributed. And those companies are just pivoting faster, and clients just like that, especially actually in the US. The US subscription is treated more as a commodity like the different tools, way more. We saw that in a lot of supply applications. So where we applied to be their software supplier, you have this very often. And in the US, they do this every year. They just say, the procurement department, you know what? Blank slate. Next year you can decide again. Please make a reevaluation. So there are companies like that, especially in the US. Yeah.
Yeah, that's why it's so much easier to sell in the US than in Europe. We don't really do that.
No, exactly. No.
All right. So there's one final question that I wanted to ask you, because I think you're one of the only persons that can actually answer that properly. Um, when it so you started Retraced on a blockchain, right? And over the course of time, it transitioned more and more into AI and AI systems. How do you see, like, okay, the provocative question is, did AI replace blockchain?
Oh, I didn't think about it like that. Honestly, myself, I don't. No, I mean, if you ask about the hype, yes, for sure. I mean, my Bitcoin are not doing so well, you know. We have to move AI again away. But if you ask me for technology, I mean, technology point of view, they're separate. I mean, the one is a brilliant technology, a distributed ledger. I mean, I still admire the idea. The drawback it had, it's very difficult to create value out of it. I introduced myself saying I I'm willing to discard technologies if I myself have apparently not the horizon to see then the specific value for our organization in this. And I didn't. It just we made supply chain traceability, and yes, there are startups out there or other companies who did it with blockchain, but it's just that was no necessity. The user would never inspect the ledger. The user would never ask for that. I was the only, you know, dude running the blockchain somewhere, and like no one really cared. However, I have heard from fantastic use cases. I can tell you one. For example, General Electronics, so GE, as far as I know, they did at least once a software internally to make cross company ledger, how do you call them? Reconciliations. So that, especially inside of this GE hub, thousands of organizations, if one owes the other and then in a triangular shape, potentially another one is involved, you can just settle those without transferring money because they lose so much money transferring money. Obvious. And where I was like, okay, that is smart because GE is not going to introduce a central system. But if they have a private blockchain where they actually reconcile all these transactions about where no one is truly the owner, that does make sense. So there are use cases, but it wasn't for us. And AI is, well, it's different. I also don't think it's taking over software that easily. It's going to definitely change how we interact with it, but it's not there yet. But let's see when AGI comes, then it's anyways point of no return, and who knows how's it called again? The one day we don't know what to look beyond. It's like the Big Bang inverse. I don't know, but we haven't reached AGI yet.
Let's see how long it takes. All right. Well, Peter, thank you very much for being on here. If you wanted to tell people to do something that watch this video, what should they do? Where should they go? How should they check you out?
Well, actually, good. So maybe you can leave my website underneath. I have my own company here in Copenhagen, but otherwise connect with me in LinkedIn. Probably that's the best. Peter Merkert, just that's my link. And otherwise, I can just encourage everyone to truly follow their own passion and reflect, is currently what I'm doing exactly fitting my own values I have as a person? And if not, look around. There's so many opportunities and maybe just go with their own guts and just try something out. I mean, what can actually happen? And I think it's a fantastic feeling just going with an own product, a founder fit, pursuing an own dream relentlessly. It's kind of self re-energizing for oneself. I can just recommend it to everyone. So that would be my call to action.
All right. Amazing. Thank you, Peter, for being here. And yeah, I wish everyone a good rest of the week. See you in the next podcast. Bye bye.